There, got it. So, Susan, we connected last year when Stephen sang, and our daughters went to high school together. So it was really a wonderful connection, and she goes to Rockland Community Church, which is, we have some volunteers who serve at camp from there as well, as one of our 20 churches that send volunteers to serve at Royal Family. So enjoy this evening, and we will be talking with you more.
Thank you, everybody. We're very, very happy to come back and share a little bit more music with you all. I would say, in trying to think of songs to sing for you all this evening, I was looking for songs that kind of inspired me. I think we all go through moments when we go through like self-doubt, when we feel less than. And so some of the songs that I picked to sing tonight are songs that kind of inspired me to know that there's another plan to bring me out on the other side. And I think when I think about Royal Family, that's part of the plan to bring so many kids out on the other side. So I hope you enjoy these and can find some inspiration from them as well. Give up. It's just the weight of the world. When your heart's heavy, I will lift it for you. Don't give up because you want to be heard. If silence keeps you high, I will break it for you. Everybody wants to be young.
Can you hear us now? Can you hear us, Celeste? Be good. So, it is our privilege and our honor to introduce Maddie Agers. Maddie attended Royal Family Kids Camp for many years, and we were privileged that she got to be one of our campers. And she's going to come share a little bit about why camp is important to her and what a difference it made. And we can't wait, because next summer she gets to come as junior staff.
Woo!
Let's welcome Maddie.
Hi, I'm Madeline Agers, and I'm 14 years old. I first attended Royal Family at 8 years old, and I went every year until I was 13, and I'm so excited to share about my wonderful experience. At first, before Royal Family, I didn't really know what love was.
When we were talking to Maddie about what she wanted to share, she had 3 things that came quickly. So she wanted to talk about Royal Family being kind of her first family. And so she's going to share a little bit about what that means. We know Maddie came from a hard past and had been in 5 different homes and was really struggling to understand what love was. Doug, you can share that first. Time to throw family?
So, when I got off the bus, everybody was cheering for me, and it was the first time I felt kind of like people wanted to be with me and paid attention to me. And doing all the activities for the birthday party, I had never had a birthday party before. So I felt so loved.
The thing she remembers is that birthday party, the tea party, and just that idea of family. That this is what family looks like. This is what family sounds like. And then secondly, this is brutal. My goodness. Second to Maddie was just this sense of adventure. And as her mom now, God created her with just an adventurous heart and spirit. So she wants to talk a little bit about how she felt that at Royal Family and how that's just been, that flame has been fanned.
So for Royal Family, we did archery and scavenger hunts, and we did fishing and horseback riding. So horseback riding was my favorite. And it was just fun to see outdoors and see all the nature and just be able to see the sky.
So pretty amazing for me, as her mom, that you guys knew my daughter before I did. And you got to meet Maddie before she came into my life and my world. And just knowing her and that sense of adventure that she still has, and knowing that she felt that at this camp, that she felt like this girl who could just go wild and fish. She would tell me after she came into my home in life, she would tell me all of the things that she did and just wouldn't stop talking. Wouldn't stop talking about it. And I just wanted to, I say thank you to all of you for that effort to show this little girl that the core of her heart and soul that God put into her, she could experience for the first time and continues to on a daily basis at home. Third thing is Maddie's desire to give back. And Royal Family has shaped her in such a way that I guess you should share.
I'm excited to come back and as a junior staff and be able to help the kids feel like they have a family and that they're loved, because you guys gave me that too. And one day I want to come back as a mentor for club. And I had one of the best, and Kristen, she was a wonderful person and she inspired me to follow my dreams. And so thank you, Kristen.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. Maddie wants a horse in her backyard. Thank you. Constantly on the list. A final thing, she just wanted to say,
To keep up the good work, Ryan family.
keep up the good work. Thank you.
How can you follow that? But Carl's going to try. Let's give a big hand for Carl for King's Team Camp. I've come prepared. I've got this, and I got this. You ever listen to someone speak and you're thinking, I sure hope I don't have to talk after them. My name's Carl Fortney, and I'm almost 57. I was hoping to have several King's Team people come and speak tonight, but it didn't work out. So I'm so glad that Maddie was able to come and share what she's been doing and knows. And King's Team was really an extension of Royal Families. It was folks like Elise that envisioned this many moons ago, where once the kids graduated, where did they go from age 12 to 15 before they could come and be a junior staff person? So it's an extension, and just to give you a little feel, we break into teams. It's like 3 or 4 boys, 3 or 4 girls, a couple men adults, a couple female adults, and a staff leader from the camp. And that person kind of leads us through the camp, and there's 3 or 4 of those teams. And we come together and we do things like a worship team, a worship as well as skits for the day, as well as a campfire at night. But those special times, as you know, come in the smaller groups when you're in your team, and we have several Bible studies throughout the day, little short Bible studies. And one experience I've learned with the camper, am I too close to this? Is through these Bible studies. And for doing this for...
No.
Turn it off. Must be an engineer.
Hello, can you hear? Can you hear me now? I've been holding that button the whole time and my thumb was tired, so I took it off. But in these Bible studies, we've been able to see growth over the years. We invest a week of our time, and sometimes you never know if it's being received or how it's being received. But in this particular instance, every time we had a Bible study, this particular boy would get up and go to the bathroom. And he'd come back about the time the Bible study was over. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is just not right. But I don't know that anybody said anything, because we kind of knew he needed some space. A year later, we're having Bible studies, and he actually stayed there. He didn't say anything, but he stayed there. The 3rd year, he's actually engaged in the discussion and asking great questions. He's on point, and and just seeing that, and we speak into their life, we speak into them through that week, and I don't know really what goes on the rest of the time, but he's actually been engaged, communicating with several of the male adult leaders over the last year or two now, through texting and things. So it's kind of neat to see. I mean, if you'd only come to camp that 1 year, you would have thought, oh, I don't know where he's going. But now we all have that hope, and we see the progression, we see the year-to-year change in him. We often come together in we call it teen talk in the evening, and this is where all the teens come together. And I can tell you that several of those kids will have discussions that they will have never had with anybody else anywhere, any other time. We've got some great topics that hit on the kids. We've had, it intrigues them, it's impactful. We see that seeds are being planted and they're breaking walls down. And last year, as part of one of these team talks, I know I have a plan of what I want to tell you, and that's the way our camp is. We have a plan, but we need to be open to the Spirit moving and what happens at camp. And it just so happened last year we had a couple volunteers not able to come to camp because one of them was diagnosed with cancer just a few weeks or a month before. But one of his daughters was able to come. And through that camp and that evening, we felt moved to, we want to pray, we want to lay hands on this daughter for her dad. And the kids got to see us, and they were invited to it. They were part of this prayer over Maddie. It's different Maddie, sorry. But they were able to see us share Christ's love in action. And that turned out to be the most impactful evening of camp, was that time where we kind of went off script, and we have a living miracle here of John, who is the volunteer that has gone through treatment. It's become kind of a family affair because he and two daughters have been involved in camp through several different years. And he's in my small men's group, and we ride mountain bikes together. So I'm getting to know John better and better and love him more all the time. So it's been our goal through camp to be able to show God's love, to be able to show them how much He loves them, and that we really love them. And so it is really not just a week. It's an investment for a lifetime. Thank you.
Yeah.
From a long time ago.
Oh, you're not nice.
Oh, I'm not. Would Elise Espinoza please join us up here?
Okay, Steve. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Elise. So, Elise, you and Timmy, right, Jones? And Trudy, and Arilla Woodburn, about 17 years ago, they had served at Royal Family for many years and said, what happens when these kids graduate? Where do they go? What do they do? So they listened to God and they started King's Teen Camp. And I'm going to let you share a little bit more about that. But we just want to say thank you, the King's Teen Group and the Royal Family Group, for caring about the kids enough to make a difference in their life so that it just didn't end because it was too important.
Thank you.
So you have to hold this.
You actually have to hold it. Okay.
You don't have to.
Hello.
You got it, I didn't.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we had that discussion several years ago after being at Royal Family, and these kids came up and said, I want to come back next year. I had so much fun at Royal Family. So that's why we decided to start King's Team. Plus, with them being able to come back to Royal Family as junior staff, as Maddie is going to be doing, What do you do between 12 and 15? You don't want to lose those kids. It gives my heart a lot of joy to know that some of them have come back due to other situations in their life. A lot of them haven't been able to, but I've also kept in touch with some of them on Facebook, and you know, they have families of their own, and it's like, whoa. When I decided to retire, well, no, let's go back a little bit. When we have a King's team, and I decided to have at night, a little thing called Teen Talk. That was kind of tough at first, but I gotta tell you, I am so thankful for the leaders that have stepped up to the plate, because you know, those teenagers are a little difficult to deal with sometimes. And there's a lot of people who enjoy going to Royal Family who cannot do King's team. With, you know, it's a difficult age, but it's also a fun age. So I decided to start Teen Talk, which I'm kind of going, what am I gonna do? Because there's so many situations these kids deal with, and they have nobody to talk to about what's going on in their lives. So the last 2 years before I decided to quit, Carl's daughter and son-in-law, as well as Chris Dratz, did the most amazing Teen Talk. I let them take over. I was in awe. I was just blown away, and decided to hand the reins over at that point in time. The leaders that have taken over, I am so thankful, because God was truly leading all of this with Carl and with John and with Chris Dratz. And oh, I'm forgetting, I know I'm forgetting people, and I don't want to, but I love them all. I don't know if it was the last year, I think a guy came, we had a speaker come, because we wanted kids to know about the internet. You know, a lot of strange, bad things can happen with kids on the internet. And there's a guy that we got in touch with who is a little familiar with this. And this is a guy who is a police officer. And he came to our camp and talked to kids about the dangers of the internet. And it really did my, I mean, it was so special to me too, because he has a whole group that they have started for graduates of Royal Family, a new type of King's team. This is Troy right here, and he's from Castle Rock, right? So I want to encourage anybody, I mean, I love Royal Family too, with my heart. I love King's team, and it's not, every age group isn't for everybody, but you know, those King's team kids have gone through so many things, and it's the abuse that continues. You know, without God's grace and all of you guys showing God's love to each and every one of these kids during camp, during the year, with phone calls, with whatever, study, these kids could be so far lost. The abuse continues, and that's sad, but thank you all for all the support, the love, the prayers, the monetary supports, everything that's needed to keep these camps going. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elise. And now it's our humbling pleasure to introduce to you somebody who's going to speak with us. He's an international speaker. He's an author. If you haven't read Grace in the Valley, I encourage you to do so. It changed our lives. So, you want to?
So there you go. Our guest speaker is Heath Adamson, and he came from Missouri. And today, he got rerouted on his flight, and we weren't quite sure he was going to make it in time. And so we just know that he has something amazing to share with you. He is the Chief of Staff of Convoy of Hope. He I'm just really humbled that he chose to come and speak here. We read his book this fall because The theme of Royal Family this summer is a sheepfold theme, and it's on Psalm 23. And so in the fall, we were looking for, to start preparing our hearts for camp, we were looking for books to read on Psalm 23. And we came across Heath's. And I think I have notes and highlights on every single page. So I would encourage you to buy his book. And he has another one too that I just started in a book. It's called The Bush Always Burns. But he gets our kids. He understands them. He also leads Feed One. It's a team of people committed to fight poverty and hunger for children. And that's where many of our kids come from. So he gets it. And so help us welcome him to come share his heart tonight. Thank you. Please.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Good. Hey, Mickey and Will, I want to honor you and thank you from the bottom of my heart for putting this together. Will you please? And I sincerely mean that. I know what it's like to raise money for a camp, to recruit volunteers to run a camp. It's not easy. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for being here. A little bit about me. I met Jesus when I was 17. Jesus took my breath away. I'm the first Christ follower who has ever existed in my ancestry. I was the first person to ever go to college, let alone further my education. And I had a very dysfunctional, abusive childhood. And so I'm thankful that Jesus loves to breathe life over dead places. You know, the record tells us in Genesis 1, God spoke and the universe was formed. But when God created humanity, God did not speak. What does the first book of Moses tell us? It says that God scooped up a mound of dirt and breathed. I like to think of it this way. God speaks and galaxies form, but God saves his very breath for us. We were created for the breath of God to live inside. And it's a distinct privilege and honor to stand here. I'm thankful to Jesus, and he is more real than he's ever been. Speaking of Jesus, who was Jesus? Well, we know that Jesus was a Hebrew male. He spoke Aramaic, yet his teachings are recorded in Greek. He never penned a word that is preserved. He didn't need to. He was the Word. How do we know that? John chapter 1, verse 14, the Word became flesh. According to almost every scholar, Jesus never traveled more than 100 miles from his hometown. Some tell us he communicated on a 6th grade level. Others tell us Jesus communicated on a 3rd grade level, which is that I frankly have no idea. What I do know is Jesus communicated in a way that even children could understand. After all, it was the little boy who brought 5 loaves of barley bread, the bread of the poor, and 2 small fish to the sovereign one, and he fed the multitude simply by giving thanks. We know that there are 125 unique teaching incidents of Jesus recorded in all 4 Gospels. What's interesting, when I did some research, because that's what I do, I like to research things, I found out that of those 125 unique incidents, 13 started with content, but everything else started with a question. So one of the primary ways that Jesus transitioned the entire world from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant is he asked questions. It's not necessarily something you would expect from someone who claims to be the way, the truth, and the life. Sometimes questions tell us more than answers do. And some of the most profound miracles that God ever performs are shrouded in questions. You know, in the Greek New Testament, there is more than one word for miracle. When you think of a miracle, perhaps you think of someone who is spiritually dead and they come alive because of the grace of God. It's true, Tim Keller's right, Jesus did not come to take bad people and turn them into good people. He came to take spiritually dead people and make them come alive. But Jesus performed some of his greatest miracles, not just through salvation, but when he invites his sons and daughters into a situation that doesn't seem to make sense and at times is profoundly painful. And there are sometimes situations that we encounter in life that God is not responsible for, but nonetheless, that does not mean that God is unaware. One of the Greek words in the New Testament for a miracle is mysterion, where we get our word mystery. Some of the most amazing miracles is when we experience a mystery and we ask God why, and seldom does he tell. I like how Gene Edwards puts it, how certain we mortals can be of things even the angels do not understand. When I think of some of the most amazing miracles God performs in the most mysterious of situations, I think of Psalm 23. It's arguably one of the most recognizable pieces of religious literature in the world. I've had conversations on every continent except Antarctica about Psalm 23 with people who do not know Christ. I've actually encountered people who didn't even know what the gospel was, and yet they were familiar with some of the verbiage found in Psalm 23. Maybe you're aware of it. It starts out, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." And David ends the psalm, "Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever."
Yes.
Psalm 23 is a beautiful passage, but what makes it even more beautiful is the history behind it. So I don't want to assume that everyone is aware. I devoted 3 years and studied the psalm. I learned an awful lot about the heart of God in my research. I'd like to share some of my experience with you. So David, we know that David did not write this psalm. How do we know that? The oldest Hebrew manuscripts of the psalm were not written in 10th century BCE Hebrew. We know that David would have recited, more than likely sang the psalm, and over the course of a few centuries, a scribe would have heard it and written it down. So did he write it? Technically not, but is he attributed, is the authorship of it attributed to David? Absolutely. And David was the young shepherd boy, if you'll remember, who was taking care of sheep, and one day he delivered some bread and cheese to the front lines of a battle, and all of the elite trained soldiers in the Israeli army were standing there, paralyzed with fear, under the taunts of a Philistine giant named Goliath. It's a true story, it really happened. And now one of the elite soldiers was willing to take on Goliath, but a young ruddy shepherd boy named David, who knew who God was and knew who he wasn't, decided to take a step of faith, and he went to the river after all, and he picked up 5 smooth stones. And the hero of the story obviously is not David. The hero of the story is God. It was God who brought down the Philistine giant, and David is immediately recognized all throughout the nation as a mighty warrior. Actually, they wrote a song about him. You can read it in 1 Samuel. It says, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." But David had only slain one. And yet all of a sudden folklore has already gone out of control. There's nothing new under the sun. It's almost like Facebook existed back then too, right? And David goes back and he takes care of the sheep. At a time in history, by the way, when shepherds were considered so inept, their testimony was not even allowed at a legal trial. Isn't it interesting that when God the Father sent his Son into the world, who did he first appear to? Shepherds. God chose a shepherd boy to bring down the giant, and yet David goes back and he takes care of the sheep. What's interesting also, though, is David was handpicked by God to be the king. You can read about it in 1 Samuel 16. Before he kills the giant, he is handpicked by God to be the king over Israel. And rather than living in the castle, or living in the palace where he is surrounded by the king's bodyguards, where he sits at the king's table and delights in the king's delicacies, David just continues his life as a shepherd, where one day after the giant named Goliath falls, David is invited to serve in the court of a king named Saul, who unfortunately was insecure, and actually the scriptures tell us he was demonized. 1 Samuel 16:14 tells us that. There are very few things more dangerous than an insecure leader. And Saul is insecure, and King David is serving in the court of King Saul, and the jealousy and the slander becomes so intense that on more than one occasion, Saul actually tries to murder David. By the time you come to 1 Samuel chapter 22, the young shepherd boy named David, who has been handpicked by the king himself to serve in the king's court, actually has to flee the throne room and run for his life. an edict has been issued for David to be hunted down like vermin, and if all else fails, murdered. David is running for his life. People in the nation of Israel believe that David is the slanderous one, David is the insecure one, David is the one who is being dishonorable. And if I was David, here's what I would think: God, I thought you chose me to be king. If you're real and if your promise is sure, why am I not sitting on the king's throne? Instead, David finds himself in a place called the Forest of Hereth in 1 Samuel 22, where he is surrounded by Saul's elite soldiers that night who want to kill him. David is alone, he's isolated. According to rabbinical tradition, David is starving to death. It's not that David hasn't eaten for 2 days, he's literally starving to death. My work with Convoy of Hope, I know what it's like to be around someone who's starving to death. David is starving to death. He has access to no food. He's surrounded by people who want to kill him. Everybody else thinks he's the one who has dishonored God and dishonored the king. And according to rabbinical tradition, this is when David begins to sing Psalm 23. And how does he open up the psalm? The Lord is my king. The Lord is my great deliverer. The Lord is the mighty warrior. That's not what he says, is it? He harkens back to the day of what it was like when it was just he and God under the starry sky on a hillside in the highlands of Judah. And he says, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Really, David, you're starving to death. You're surrounded by people who want to kill you, and you have the audacity to tell me you want nothing. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. That's interesting. God makes us lie down in green pastures, but later on, David says we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's easy to invert that. It's easy to walk through green pastures and lie down in the valley. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. The still waters. I apologize. Sometimes when I read the Bible, my imagination runs wild. To me, this is the most humorous line in the entire psalm. Still waters, really. Like, what about in Mark chapter 4, Jesus, when you told your disciples to get into a boat on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, knowing full well a storm would break, a storm that was so tumultuous and violent it actually blows the boat 13 miles off course. Did the devil cause the storm? No, not all storms come from the evil one. Jesus told his disciples to get into the boat, knowing full well a storm would come. And where is Jesus in the midst of the storm? The gospel record tells us he's sleeping in the bottom of the boat. I can imagine it going this way. The wind and the waves are beating against the boat. They're convinced, I'm convinced if I'm a disciple, I'm going to drown, I'm going to die. And if you were like me, and if I was like the disciples, I would probably ask, where is God? God, if you're real, why are we in the midst of a storm? In the midst of a storm you invited us into. Where is Jesus? Have you ever asked that? Where is Jesus in the midst of your storm? Well, I'll tell you where Jesus was then. In Mark 4, Jesus is sleeping in the bottom of the boat. How does Jesus fall asleep in the midst of a storm? Somehow, Jesus learned how to live in a world that doesn't have storms. He's sleeping in the bottom of the boat, and I can just imagine Jesus waking up and coming up to the top. And there's some of his disciples hanging over the boat. Some of them are seasick, some of them are nauseous. And I can just imagine one of the disciples saying, Jesus, we're going to die. What's your problem? Why don't you calm the storm? And I can imagine Jesus looking at some of his disciples and saying, why are you so terrified? Why are you so afraid? Don't you see? The waters are still. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Paths is plural. There's more than one path. If you're like me, you love it when the path paved in righteousness leads to the green pasture. But what do you do when the path leads to the valley of the shadow of death? It's also paved in righteousness. Halfway through the psalm, the language changes. I didn't pick up on this until a few years ago. In the first half of the psalm, David talks about God in abstract terms. He says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. But once he wanders out of the green pasture and he comes into the valley, he becomes you. You anoint my head with oil. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. It's almost like there's this realm of intimacy that exists with God that's not found in the green pasture. It's found in the valley. But it's only a shadow. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, in Hebrew it's literally translated to pathless desert. Have you ever seen those pictures in National Geographic of the massive sand dunes in the middle of nowhere where there are no footprints? That's the metaphor, that's the word image of what the Valley of the Shadow of Death literally looks like. It's a place that's beautiful and stunning, but no one's been there before. And of all places for God to summon us to, at times it is the pathless desert. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? You're with me. It's your rod and your staff that comforts me. I'll come back to that in a moment. He says, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Now, I've been married to Allie for 21 years. We have 2 daughters. Layton is 18, Dallin is 17. So that just means we watch a lot of Hallmark in my house. Okay? So I live in a home with 3 foo-foo ladies, and I absolutely love it. And when the girls were a bit younger, and it was birthday time, you talked about your first birthday party, okay? So maybe you can relate to this. So when our girls were a little bit younger, and it was time, here's what we did. Well, my wife always wanted to make sure everything was cute. Any crazy grandmas or crazy moms in the room? Let me see your hands. Can I get a witness, okay? How many of you know somebody in the United States became filthy rich because they convinced crazy moms everything needs to match and be cute at birthday parties? So we went to this big brick and mortar store, a party store. You walk in, and of all things, what do you have? You have pink plates, pink napkins, pink forks, spoons, and knives, because everybody knows it's a good idea to give a 4-year-old a plastic knife at the table, right? So you have pink utensils, even pink streamers and pink balloons. Everything had to match, everything had to be cute. You know what? I'm okay. I'll spend 30, 40 bucks to make it cute. It's all good. What I cared about was the cake. And I want a real cake. If you're going to spring some money for a cake, don't give me that nasty Cool Whip icing with spray paint. I want buttercream. I want 20 sticks of butter. I want 10 pounds of sugar, right? I want a real piece of cake. Well, I was in charge of the cake. Allie was in charge of making everything cute. And we always sat down at our kitchen table, and as a family, we had this activity that we always participated in together. We cultivated the invitation list. Maybe you can relate. So when our kids were younger, we always asked, well, sweetie, who would you like to invite to the birthday party? I want to invite Emma. You do? Why would you like to invite Emma? Emma's my friend. I play with her at recess. All right, sweetheart, you can invite Emma. Layton, what about you? Who would you like to invite? I would like to invite Tanner. Really? Why is that? I think Tanner's cute. Okay, after I run a background check on 4-year-old Tanner, maybe he can come. So we always created the invitation list, and we sent out invitations. I don't recall a time ever in the history of our 21-year marriage, let alone in the history of our 18 years being parents, when we created the invitation list and I ever looked at Allie and said, hey, sweetie, has anybody been released from death row who's still a danger to society? Why don't we invite them to the party? Let's invite the creepy neighbor. Let's invite the drunk uncle. Let's find the people in the neighborhood that are going to single-handedly ruin the entire experience for our kids. I think that's who we should invite to the party, honey. I never said that, and I don't recall a time of Allie ever saying that to me. We only invited people to the party who we guaranteed would give our kids the greatest experience. You can relate. And if anyone knows how to throw a party, it's God. And who does God invite? Your enemies. He prepares a table for you in the presence of your enemy. And the enemy, by the way, is never a person. You know, we live in a world where there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of famine. Our kids who wake up every day, they don't know what they're going to eat. There are people who sit in quiet desperation. And it really doesn't matter how well educated someone is. I'm 4 weeks away from getting my PhD from the University of London. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And can I tell you, some of these highly educated people sit in quiet desperation. All they've done is made a lot of money, and they have a better brand of misery. You don't have to go to sub-Saharan Sahel in Africa to be around misery. It's all over the face of the earth. But I would suggest to you that the most rampant source of evil among children is not famine, although that's a travesty and malevolent. It's not lack of access to clean water, although that's horrible and that shouldn't be a reality. I would suggest to you it's hopelessness. And God prepares a table in the presence of an enemy called hopelessness, where he anoints our head with oil and our cup overflows. So David, in singing this psalm, would have stolen an example from Hebrew shepherding culture to prove a point. And before I close, I would like to share it with you. Here's the way it went down. Because back then, shepherds were nomads, they were vagabonds, they wandered all over the desert. For lack of a better term, they were typically homeless, and they set up their tent and their camp, at times for a few days, and then they would pick up and move and find another green pasture, which, side note, green pastures don't exist in Israel if you've ever been there. The only reason there's a green pasture is because the shepherd will remove the sharp, jagged stones from the earth and irrigate the ground, because back then shepherds at night lied down with the sheep. Green pastures only exist because the good shepherd goes before the sheep to make sure they have something comfortable to lie down on. And when the sun would set over the great Sinai Peninsula, the way it would work, let's say I'm a shepherd, because back then it was a male-dominated society. Fortunately, things are changing. I'm glad that people understand men and women are both created in the image of God, but we still have some room to grow. But back then, women were not even allowed to receive an education. So when the sun would set, because I'm the male leader, I'm the shepherd of my tribe, my clan, I look off into the distance, and let's say I see your campfire. And the way it worked is I walked toward your campfire to see if I could borrow some hot coals. And the way it would work is somebody would alert the male leader of your family and basically say, Dad, somebody's coming. And so you had these two male shepherds standing in the middle of a field, and on both sides were their families, and everybody's watching, everybody's looking, and everybody knows about what's about to go down, because it was the custom. It always happened this way. Without saying a word, you, the male shepherd, reached out and handed me a container of oil. Sometimes it was in a small earthen vessel, at times an animal horn. And the oil had two purposes. Number one, it had a medicinal purpose. It killed head lice. And number two, it had an aromatic purpose, because after all, we've been wandering around the desert for quite some time. There's no Axe body spray for the junior high guys, right? There's no Aqua de Joe. There's no Bath and Body Works. We stink. And so you give me oil. I anoint my head with it. It kills head lice. And then it covers over my body odor, and I turn around and I anointed the head of every single one of my family members with oil as well. And then we followed you into your tent, and here's the custom. You didn't have a table and chairs like we do. We'd lay down one side, we reclined, and we ate with one hand, and we ate a meal that typically consisted of dates, raisin cakes, curds, honey that comes from dates, not bees, and on a good day, maybe some goat meat. And then at the end of the meal, without saying a word, the male shepherd walks up to me, and I hold out my cup. This was the custom. I hold out my cup, and you took a wineskin, and if you filled my cup up halfway, it was your way of saying, you know what, Heath, the conversation's been great, but I prefer you get out of my face. But if you filled my cup up to the top, it's your way of saying, why don't you spend the night with us? We have so enjoyed the company of you and your family. And if you fill my cup up to the top, after all the little kiddos would fall asleep, here's what the two shepherds did. They sat around the campfire, and they took their rod and their staff. At times, the rod and the staff was one instrument, at times two instruments. It just depends. I don't have time to get into it. But what Hebrew shepherds did is they carved symbols into their staff. For example, the Hebrew letter lamed is in the shape of a shepherd's staff. Whenever God performed a miracle, they carved a symbol into their staff as a reminder. And the shepherds sat around the campfire and did what Psalm 77:11 says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Now we understand why David said, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. What's David doing in the forest of Hereth when he's surrounded by people who want to kill him, when God handpicked him to be king, and yet the very situation he's experiencing in life certainly does not line up with the promise that you're a king's kid, chosen to be king. What's he doing? He's saying, God, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. He's remembering all of the things that God had done in his life before. Now we understand why Moses, the shepherd, took his staff and stretched it out, and then God parted the Red Sea. It's almost like Moses is saying, God, if you did it before, I think you can do it again. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And in the morning, after the shepherds shared the great stories of God from their rod and or their staff, they parted ways. But God doesn't fill David's cup up halfway, does it? God doesn't even fill David's cup up to the top. David says, you anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Now we understand why at the end of the psalm, the one handpicked by God to rule and reign as king has the audacity to say this: surely goodness and mercy will, literally in Hebrew, hunt me down, chase me down. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord. Not in the king's palace, not in the king's summer home. No, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God, in his word, tells us that he prepares a table, not in the valley, although it's only a shadow, but in the green pasture. I'll share one story of what it looks like to help a child understand that even in the midst of the darkest of valleys, even there God can prepare a table in the presence of an enemy. By the time she was in her low 20s, she'd been married numerous times. She had a few abortions. The children that she brought into the world were taken away by the state. She was saw to be unfit as a parent. And I'll use wisdom because of the ages in the room, but she made decisions to provide for herself economically that caused her to violate who God created her to be. She was addicted to numerous substances. She struggled with depression and on a few occasions tried to end it all. And after one failed attempt, she had the thought, and I quote, "I'm such a loser, I can't even take my life right." And they admitted her simply to spare her from herself. And one of the I believe it was the psychiatrist, looked at the mom and dad and said, next time she tries, she'll be successful. She's not doing this to get attention. She really tried for this to be fatal. And I'm telling you, if something doesn't change next time, she won't survive. The mom and dad didn't know what to do. Who would? And so they heard about a doctor that specialized in severe mental illness, and they decided to take their little girl, who now was in her young 20s, to go see this doctor. The mom and dad kissed her goodbye. She walked through the door. They sat in the lobby, and I can guarantee they prayed. And the girl sat down in the office, and the doctor began to walk her through a process called reflection, which is where you look back over your life and you ask a question like, how did I end up here, and did I ever think I would end up here, right? That's probably a question most of us have asked. But when you go through a valley of the shadow of death, sometimes that's a painful question to ask. Because sometimes people walk through the valley of the shadow of death because of their own decisions. But there are times when people walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and it's because of the decisions other people make. And I can assure you, when we hear the stories of kids that come to the camp, I bet 99.9% of those kids are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and it's not because of their decisions. The doctor is walking this gal through this process of reflection. She remembered what it was like when she was 17 and that happened, and when she was 14 and that happened, and when she was 13 and that horrible thing happened. And finally she goes back into her life when she's in second grade. Now if I could just remind you, when little girls are in second grade, they play with dolls. They play wedding. I remember on Friday, that was my day off, and we played wedding. And the girls put on their fancy dresses we got at Target, and they walked down, and I held open my Bible. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today in the presence of God, beside of this company, and join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Marriage is an honorable estate instituted by God since the creation of the world. Marriage is therefore not to be entered into lightly, but soberly, reverently, in the fear of God. Who gives this woman to be married? Her mother and I, right? So that's what we did. Like every Friday, we played wedding. They walked down our kitchen hallway. That's what we did. They got married numerous times to a boy that wasn't worthy. All right. sorry, I'm totally rabbit trailing. You're so kind, and I just had a flashback. I'm sorry. So when girls are in second grade, they play wedding. They play with dolls. Well, when this girl was in second grade, she went through something that's horrible, and I'm warning you, what I'm about to share with you is very painful, and I share this story not for effect, because what we don't need is in a moment when you're given an opportunity to partner yet again with Royal Family Kids Camp, what we don't need is just an emotional response. God does not bless an emotional giver. God blesses a cheerful giver. Right?
Amen.
So this is not for emotional response. This is to help you understand that even in the darkest of valleys, God can prepare a table. In second grade, she had this flashback of something that happened. And she wasn't sitting in still. She went to public school. She wasn't sitting still that day because of some things that happened. She had suffered some abuse at the hands of a family member that was as horrible as you can imagine. She wasn't paying attention in school, and the teacher became frustrated. And listen, thank God for educators. Thank God for a group of men and women who aren't appreciated, let alone compensated enough for what they do. On this particular day, yeah, go ahead. On this particular day, the educator just made a mistake. So I want to be clear, I'm not slamming educators. I'm one, okay? I teach at a university. So she was having a bad day, and she said, young lady, I want you to stand to your feet, because the young second grade girl wasn't sitting still. And the teacher just said to the class, I want every single one of you to walk up to back then it used to be a chalkboard, and I want you to write down everything you hate about her. And so one by one, the second grade boys and girls walked up to the chalkboard and picked up a piece of chalk and began to write down things on the chalkboard. How many of you know that second graders can be pretty mean? They write down things like you're stupid, you're fat, nobody wants to play with you at recess, wish you'd never been born, all these things. Fast forward, at this time, in the office of the psychiatrist, this lady, the pain becomes so unbearable, she can't handle it anymore. She jumps up and she starts to run out of the doctor's office. And she thought to herself at this time, and I quote, why am I talking to somebody we pay to care about me? She reaches out to grab the doorknob, and she was running away like she always did, but a boldness comes over the psychiatrist, and he said, Miss, I'm not finished with you. Get back here and sit down. And she stopped, and for some reason, she didn't go through the door. For some reason, she turned around, she walked back, and she sat down in the chair, and sat down and listened to what the doctor had to say to her. And this is what he said. He said, Miss, you forgot the most important part of that day. In second grade. Do you remember that little boy who in the back of the classroom got up and walked up to the chalkboard and wrote these words, but I still love you? He said, I was that boy, and I remember you, and I've been trying to get a hold of you for years. What I want to suggest to you is we live in a world where unfortunately there are kids on the slate of their heart have things that have been written at times by strangers, and unfortunately at times by people that they thought they could trust. At times there are people that we should be able to count on who write things on the chalkboard of our heart, and sometimes they rob our kids of things. They steal things from our kids, things like identity, and things like confidence, and things like understanding that God doesn't create junk, that God doesn't make mistakes. But in the presence of an enemy, like shame and abuse and depression and neglect, even there, even though God isn't the one who writes the junk on the chalkboard, even there, God can prepare a table. And I would suggest to you that there are kids right here in this state who have an awful lot of stuff on their chalkboard, but someone still loves them. And something as simple as a week at camp can remind them of that. I'm not the one doing the ask tonight. That's not my job. My job is to talk to you about Psalm 23 and remind you that even in the midst of a horrific tragedy, even there, God prepares an amazing table. And He doesn't just prepare a table for men and women. He doesn't just prepare a table for people who have great jobs and IRAs and take a couple weeks of vacation a year. He prepares a table in the presence of the enemies of the most beautiful and precious of kids. And they simply need to know, even if it's 1 week out of the year, that someone still loves them. Jesus, thank you that you are who you say you are. I want to thank you that you're good and that you're loving and that you know us by name. Thank you for the distinct privilege of being able to be in this room and hear about a program that understands that there's no such thing as darkness. There's only absence of light. We hear about a summer camp that literally exposes kids to the most important thing written on the chalkboard, that somebody loves them. And I ask God that tonight, each one of our hearts would be open to whatever it is we can do to lend our voice to the greater conversation. Whatever it is we can do to partner with you to write the next chapter in your story and the life of these beautiful little boys and girls. I want to thank you, God, that each one of us in this room, we know for a fact that you've prepared a table for us in the presence of our enemies, in the presence of the shame and the guilt, in the presence of being spiritually lost and spiritually dead, in the presence of cancer, you prepare a table. In the presence of depression and hopelessness, you prepare an amazing feast. In the presence of our personal valley, we sat down at the table of God and we gazed into your eyes and we feasted while our enemy was invited to watch. I pray that tonight, through our faith and our generosity and our obedience to your voice, that we will partner with you once again to watch kids sit at the table of God, the table of their King, in the midst of their valley, to feast as well. I ask it humbly, but I ask it boldly. And it's in the name of Jesus I ask. Amen.
Amen.
Let me run through a field of the night. Let me live from the ground till my soul is in flight. Let me sway like the shade of a tree. Let me swirl like a cloud in the storm of the sea. Lift me on my way through the dawning day, and I wanna flow, wanna rise, wanna spill, wanna grow on the side of a hill. I don't care if the train runs late, if the checks don't clear, if the house blows down. I'll be off where the weeds run wild, where the seeds fall far from this earth round town. And I'll start to soar. Watch me rain till I pour, and I'll catch a ship that'll sail me astray. Get caught in the wind, I'll just have to obey till I'm flying away. And I'll leave behind all the clouds in my mind. I wanna wake without wondering why, finding myself in a burst for the sky. I'll just roll. Let me lose all control. I wanna wake without wondering why, free as the sound of the sea in the shell. I don't know, maybe I'm just a fool. I should keep to the ground, I should stay where I'm at. Maybe everyone has hunger like this, and the hunger will pass, but I can't think like that. All I know is somewhere through a spill. Wanna grow on the side of a hill. Wanna shift like a wave rolling on, free from the path I've been traveling upon.